So welcome. We are live streaming from the Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Grace Telesco, and I am with Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice. Um, Thank you for joining. This is a webinar that's being live streamed on the YouTube channel for Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice, and we are joined tonight by an amazing guest. His name is Dr. Gregory Salters. But before we get into that and talk about a little bit about the subject matter that we're going to delve into tonight, I want to introduce my dean, the dean of the School of Criminal Justice, Fischler College of Education, Dr. Kimberly Durham. So thank you, Dean, for being with us and all of your support, especially around all that we do in our programming here. Thank you, Dr. Durham.
You're welcome. And you're getting a little bit of a shot here of an active German Shepherd. So I hope you all enjoy that. But welcome tonight. Welcome, Dr. Salters. And thank you so much, Dr. Telesco, for hosting this. I enjoy attending all of the time. And so I look forward to tonight. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so without any further ado, I'm going to bring Dr. Gregory Salters on. He just recently retired from the Fort Lauderdale Police Department as the acting assistant interim chief, and just recently retired, as I said, and now currently taking the director of security at Florida Memorial, and soon to be adjunct with us and teaching for them. And he teaches in Miami-Dade also for the police department, if I'm not mistaken. And his list of credentials are endless. Dr. Salters has so many varied subject matter expert areas that he can delve into. And we've had him before on, and this time.
Up. Do you want to go outside?
Oh, okay. So here's what we're going to do on that. Okay. So one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, the biggest thing that we're going to be talking about in this series, because this is a series on the best practices in police community relations. And what we want to do is, we don't want to gloss over what the problems are, Dr. Salters, but I think that we all know what the problems are. I think we all can acknowledge that there's a strain between the police and the community. I think we all know that there's a historical political context for this. I think we all know that that there are some strategies out there that have been kind of half-hearted, but there are strategies that are best, that have worked, that are effective. Some are evidence-based, that are effective. And I wanted to just turn this program over to you, for you to talk a little bit about best practices in police community relations. In other words, really bottom line, what works? What works? And there's so many variables that we're talking about here. This isn't just an easy answer. It's not a simple solution. It's not reductionistic in any way. We know that there are a lot of areas where initiatives have worked, whether it be in education, the education of our officers, recruitment of our officers, selection of our officers, training at the entry level or in service. We know that neighborhood policing, community policing strategies, clergy liaison, early intervention, stress monitoring, supervision, body cam, the list goes on and on and on. But I wanted you to just have sort of free reign in talking about, based on your education, based on your experience as a practitioner, what works. What do we know to be tried and true that works? What works that we really don't try for very long, that we need to continue to try and follow through on? So best practices in police community relations, and it's all you, Dr. Salters.
Wow. Good evening, everyone. And I want to thank you again, Dr. Plasko, for allowing me to have this platform with your dynamic team and your students and everyone. And Dean, thank you for having me on here. And when we're talking about this, and as you stated, Doc, it is a broad topic dealing with community policing relations. And you've heard people talk about community oriented policing, and it goes back, and you heard people talk about problem oriented policing. One of the things that I'd like to do as we talk about this, I'd like to kind of situate what we're dealing with. And people have talked about 21st century policing. That's really, I believe that came out like 2015 or so. And when you look at the pillars of that 21st century policing, a few of them here I just wanted to mention too. We're dealing with building trust and legitimacy. And that's number one. And if you notice in communities where there is trust and legitimacy within law enforcement, there tends to be a team effort of what all is happening. And it tends not to have as much tension when you build trust and legitimacy. And that's one of the things, if you look at all of the incidents that are calling tension, you will notice that those are two factors that may be missing, that trust and legitimacy. And the interesting thing about trust and legitimacy is not only applies to law enforcement, but it also even applies to even when you're in school and going to class. If you can remember your teacher, many of us have been out of school from elementary school for a long time, but if you can go back and think about that elementary school teacher that you can remember, the reason that you can really remember them most times is because they were able to build trust with you and had some sense of legitimacy. And many times that impacted the way that you did your work. So it's no different in law enforcement. The next one is we're looking at, once we're dealing with trust and legitimacy, we have to deal with policy and oversight, because a lot of times we have to look at what policies do we have in place and what oversight do we have. And this also brings into accountability. And a lot of times individuals have not really fully examined the policy. And Doc, sometimes we will write policy and we look at policy, and sometimes policies has a disparate impact, meaning we had well intentions when we wrote the policy, but based on what's happening, it could have a disparate impact on some groups and not others. And that's when we have to kind of look at it and review the oversight. Also, we have to look at technology. What technology do we mention? You mentioned the body cameras. You've mentioned the different things that we have out there. We have our license plate readers. We have a lot of things out there. And we also have social media. And quite honestly, when we're building community, let's think about it from community. When we were growing up, community was largely geographically based. And it's, this is my community, this is my neighborhood. But right now, as we're talking about law enforcement and we're talking about the impact of social media, your community basically is whoever you have friended on social media. And I think a lot of times we do not consider the impact of social media on our relationship with the community. Because if I like law enforcement, all of my friends are going to be, I like law enforcement. And the way the algorithms go, then that means that I'll be getting things positive to law enforcement. Similarly to if you're out shopping for cars and you like a particular type of car, if you like a Mercedes and you look for Mercedes, you're going to close your laptop and then you're going to open it up tomorrow and it's going to be the Mercedes there. And you're like, wow, Mercedes must be really popular. No, that is the algorithm that is there that keeps coming to you, where someone else's algorithm is set to BMWs. And I think sometimes we are talking about building community, and sometimes we look at it as bringing people into our community as opposed to us finding out what's really going on in the community that we're here to serve. And sometimes it's like they say, it's bigger than us. And us could be whoever you are. If you're in law enforcement, we need to reach out to the community to see what the community needs. And then also, if the community is there, they need to reach out to law enforcement and see how they are. Because personally, I look at it as a three-legged stool, if you will. I'm dealing with law enforcement, I'm dealing with education, and I'm dealing with the community. So when we're dealing with the community learning what they do, law enforcement learning, education, meaning all the way up K through doctorate level. This is all an educational process. And how we come together, I think that's where we begin to do things. And we also have to look at educating each other about what is actually going on in our communities. And the more we do that, I think we can move it forward. If you look at many of the incidences that have happened, it's been for a lack of education, either about what someone could or couldn't do, did or didn't do, or what some organization did. Then the other thing that we're talking about is community policing and crime reduction. So we talk about what is community policing. And community policing, by its very nature, is different because it depends on the community in which you are policing. So community policing is basically finding out the concerns of the community and making sure that those concerns are met. In some communities, it may be high crime rates, and others, it might be checking by to make sure everyone is okay. But that's your community-oriented policing because it is geared to and serving the community for what it needs with the law enforcement understanding. And that's why when individuals are talking about defund the policing, that depends on what community you're in and how are you actually describing defunding. Because many times in law enforcement agencies, we have reallocated funds because we might be civilianizing some positions that were previously sworn. And that is a reallocation of funding, which happened long before these particular things were happening with the tension and the stories that we're having now. And even if you look here locally, Broward County versus Dade County. In Broward County years back, the cities had to join a police department or the sheriff's office. So therefore, we were getting smaller police departments. And in Dade County, theirs was going just the opposite. And they were breaking off from the Miami-Dade. So that's what those various communities wanted and they voted for and they were going for. Then some other ones that we have is that we're talking about it. Let me get my notes here. The other one is also people talk about training and education. And they often talk about law enforcement officers training and their education. And they say, aren't the officers trained in this? The officers should be trained in that. And many times I tell them, I understand the need for training, but it's kind of like when I took physics. I took physics, I passed physics, but do not give me a physics test now. So I was trained in it. So many times individuals have been trained, but it's not really, are you trained? It's, are you able to apply your training in the appropriate way at the appropriate times? So therefore, we have to begin looking at bridging that gap, as we talk about it in academia, bridging the gap between theory and practice.
Exactly.
So many times we have to show people what we're actually doing here and show where we have the researchers that have the research to get it to the practitioners so that they can practice it and we can have our studies done as to whether it works or not. But so many times we'll work in silos. We'll have theory and we'll have research on one side by researchers who have not done the job, and we'll have people that are doing the job that don't listen to the research that's out there and they've never done the research. Exactly. So therefore we must come together from education standpoint, law enforcement standpoint, and the community to make sure all of us get this knowledge and share in this body of knowledge and share in the research so that we can move things forward.
Yes.
And that's what we're looking at. Yes.
Hold that thought 1 second. So I'm just going to jump in for a minute and two points. One point is you talk about education and education for the police as well as the community, right? So, and again, when we talk about community, we're really talking about communities. So to make it sound this broad brushstroke of community, it's sort of like operationally defined community. What do you mean by it? You know, who are we talking about? And we know that it's different for the affluent community versus the poorer communities. We know that it's different in certain groups of ethnic groups, certain racial groups. Like we know all of that, right? So, but it does really boil down to knowledge, education, understanding each other, knowing the law, understanding what the law is on both sides of this. And as well as it's about communication, effective communication, and being able to really talk to each other. So what is your thought? And I don't know if you were going to bring this up or talk about it, but civilian police academies, how important and how effective as a best practice would you say civilian police academies are, or citizens academy, whatever particular police department terminology is used?
Okay, and to define that, that would be when we bring civilians from the community into police departments and we expose them to the various areas of the police department to tell them what we do, have them interact, and basically building a stronger connection with the police department. Is that the way that you're looking at it, Doc?
Exactly. I mean, back in NYPD, back in the day, in my first chapter of my life, we had civilian police academy, and they went through the academy for 3 months. Mm-hmm. And many were clergy, some were community leaders. You know, you were really handpicked And it was quite a privilege, really, to be able to be invited to come in and be a part of this. It would be great to do this in a widespread way where everyone, if they wanted to, can go through this type of training. I witnessed people come in the beginning, and this is anecdotal, so no empirical evidence on this, but I watched people come in with very hostile feelings and leave as allies.
Okay.
Has that been
And
your experience?
this is kind of interesting, Doc. You brought up a couple different layers in here. One, when you talk about the Community Policing Academy. One, when we talk about education, this is one of the things that I'm very big on, education and not being the best kept secret. Many times people are unaware of the Citizens Police Academy because we as an organization or as a profession have not really put it out there and advertised it and made it to where our community would be seeking it and wondering when we have it. Because sometimes you have individuals that are on the inside that are like, the citizens should know what we do. So therefore, you can have a Citizens Police Academy and you staff it wrong with instructors, and it basically works opposite. But if we actually tell individuals we're wanting your input and we tell them the benefits of coming in there and that it is a selective group, because this is one thing that we've run into issues also. Sometimes they call it the Citizens Police Academy, and at Fort Lauderdale, we changed it to Community Policing Academy because not everyone is a citizen for various reasons. And so therefore, some people were not wanting to participate. So then you start having it as the Community Policing Academy, and then you start having how many people are really signing up, because then it is a commitment on their part to attend. And just because of the way society is, many times those individuals that aren't socioeconomically advanced may need to be working and can't afford to take off time, or they have other competing interests. So therefore it can become socioeconomically to where you have one side of your community or one sector represented more than the other. But when you're having individuals come in, when you say empirical, that's normally what our quantitative researchers would say. But if I interview them, there is definitely empirical qualitative data that shows us that there was some benefit to the encounter that we had. And
Yes.
that's one thing that I talk to individuals about many times. When you have an encounter with law enforcement or the community, everybody has something in common. And when we talk about it from diversity, what we talk about in the LGBT community, a lot of times I was over our LGBT liaisons and we were talking about it. It was very interesting. The captain that was over it, when he had it with liaisons within the organization, they were not going to post the openings in his squad just like they did the other ones. And I said, why not? It is a unit just like everybody else. He's like, well, not many people are going to want to be. I said, well, what we have to do is treat it just like we do all units and let the chips fall where they may. You just never know. And so sometimes it comes up to where individuals that are allies, and as an ally, we have to be able to reach over into communities that we may not be a part of, but we can definitely be an ally with, to make sure that all communities, as you aptly stated, are represented, because these are things that comes up in our community that we must move forward and can create issues. And many times when we include those communities, we find out ways that we could solve crime, get down crime. And this is one thing that I found out: no matter what we do, we focus so much on our differences than our similarities. If you look at all of the communities, I haven't met a community that doesn't want their children to live better than they did. And I haven't come across a community that wants to just be safe in their homes. So if we can agree on that, then we can deal with law enforcement, community, and education to move things forward. So when you're talking about things that work, there is one of the things, procedural justice. I also taught that at Fort Lauderdale. And we talked about it. If you look at every time there is an instance that goes on with law enforcement or anybody else, everybody wants to know the procedure. When you recommended me as an adjunct, I had to go through the process to get to that point. So there was a procedure, and that procedure had to be the same for everyone. So when you're talking about procedural justice, which individuals can Google, individuals can also Google 21st century policing to get the whole write-up to see what actually is going on out there. And these are things that have been in place, but to your point, many people are either unaware of them or have not used these tools to move forward. And this is an opportunity to educate everyone to where these are some things that you would want to look at and put in place to move forward. Because the 4 pillars of procedural justice is Are we getting the voice? Are we listening to the individuals that are being impacted? Are we being impartial? Are we being just? And are we being transparent? So if you have those four pillars when you're doing things, you see it when there's a incident involving law enforcement, most people want to know, why did they do this? If they did it to these people, why didn't they do it to that person? So this is all procedural justice questions. And if you look at it, and if your procedures are just, then it gives you a stronger bond with your community. And I also teach a class called Everyone Communicates, Few Connects. It's out of John C. Maxwell's book. And you think about it, how many times have we gone to meeting or gone to incidents where we communicated with individuals, but we did not connect with them?
Yes.
And once you connect with them, that is when you're able to really have a bond and able to have influence and move forward.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to talk about, my experience back in the day, and we're talking in the early 80s in Brooklyn, in the housing projects, where as a young cop, surprised that I can even remember that far back, but it's, horse and buggy era. And I walked a foot post. As a rookie, I walked a foot post and many tours on foot in the projects, doing vertical checks, roof landing checks. And we're talking about like midnight tours. And it seems to me that we've come away from that with technology. Like, technology has given us radio motor patrol cars. Technology has given us the ability to do things that we were never able to do before. But we don't see a lot of foot patrol. And I'm just wondering about, I know my experience and the experience of those officers back in the 80s that walked foot posts. They got to know the people, so they waved to Mrs. Jones and Mr. Smith, and they knew the kids, and they, what are you doing out? Why, you knew who was supposed to be in school, when, where they lived. But we've come away from that in our 21st century now, right? And I know that in Florida specifically, the notion of walking a foot post is probably really unheard of, except maybe in Miami Beach. And bicycle patrol is also another sort of neighborhood policing strategy. But in your opinion, as an executive, and as an educator, a practitioner, an expert, subject matter expert, would you say that we've gotten too tied into the technology and less back to the basics in terms of walking that foot post, getting to know the people, being immersed in the community? What do you think?
Yes, but if you look at it, when you were doing your tours, what was the staffing? What was your expected coverage in this type deal? So therefore, you were able to meet your coverage on your foot patrol and your others, and going out on your phone and dialing in your updates and this type stuff. But as we have grown and the geographic areas have changed, then it's a matter of, how do you cover these geographic areas? So if we were on foot patrol now, would we really be able to cover our geographic areas? Then when we went to the cars, then they're driving, and it used to be with the windows down, but then we got tinted windows and the windows went up, and you kept going and going and going. And even now we're having it where we're having the cameras that are helping us to deal with certain areas. So now if you got a camera that's really out there in the area, the police aren't even coming by. We are watching the cameras in certain areas. Why? Because we're trying to have eyes as far as we can, and the budgets and the money does not really allow us to hire the number of officers that we probably need. So we're using technology to assist us in doing our jobs. And when you mentioned the bike patrol, I served bike patrol at the city of Fort Lauderdale. And I like to say that was before it was sexy. So I was on bike patrol in about 93 to 1994 in our Sistrunk area, and we knew everybody. We were on bike patrol. We were there. And that was when it was just starting up. So it was rather interesting being on bike patrol, and you're having guys selling drugs out there. And because the bike was silent, you could almost roll up and take the handoff on the hand-to-hand transactions. I also taught DARE for 4 years at 7 different schools. And ironically, it was on last Friday, I was speaking to a class at FIU where a lady that just retired from BSO knew somebody, asked me to speak to the class. And I'm speaking to the class, and the guy was telling me that one of his friends said, "Oh, you're having Dr. Salters talk." And the guy turned out to be one of my DARE students that he knew. Then as we talked, turns out I taught him DARE in the early 90s. And so he was over at one of the schools in Fort Lauderdale. Now he has his JD and his EdD, and I got a chance to speak at his class. So when you talk about the DARE program and that community-oriented policing, when I taught the individuals DARE, I might have been teaching in 5th grade, but the entire student body saw me because I was always on campus. Then you had the connection with the parents, the aunts, the uncles, and everybody else because you were there. So if you look at it from 93 to about 99, I taught DARE at 7 different schools. So you look at the math about how many direct students versus that effect of the families and that type stuff. And all of that was community oriented policing. And many of them right now are having that effect, but the grant funding ran out.
Well, and the grant funding ran out probably as a result of some of those research studies that showed that DARE was not effective in what? In reducing that target population from using recreationally even drugs. But what effect did the police officer in the classroom have on the life of that student? And their perception of policing is something that wasn't studied, right? So really unfortunate to throw the baby out with the bathwater in that case. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I guess that's the other thing, that when you really look at the multi-layers of education and the systemic things that are in place, many of those individuals that were positively impacted due to what's in our educational system tend not to go on and get their doctorate because of their success rate in high school. And if you aren't getting out of high school, the likelihood of you getting a doctorate is tremendously low, which means that the likelihood of having someone who has a passion to really research and do what it takes to get to the research level of those particular issues is further reduced.
Right. So that's why it's so important for us to apply to the NSU School of Criminal Justice PhD program in criminal justice, because we need more research in areas that people have said, oh, that doesn't work, but really it was only tried for a little time, and the research question was very, very focused on one variable, one outcome variable, and didn't look at some of the other variables. Because I believe, and maybe I'm idealistic, but I believe that this relationship between the police and the community is reparable.
I would go so far to say that we may be highlighting the negative and those that aren't doing as well, as opposed to highlighting the things that are doing well in the relationships in the communities. And again, we get back to the social media algorithm, because what sells? Positive does not sell news media. And if in fact you are making things go viral that go bad, then that's what's going to be on everybody's thing. It doesn't really go viral when you're doing absolutely correct, and more of your kids are going to college, more and more of the kids are staying out of drugs, more and more byproducts to where their sisters and brothers now know the law enforcement, more and more byproducts of how it'd be interesting right now to just do a study of how many people that are in law enforcement were in DARE. How many people that are in your doctoral program at Nova went through a DARE program? Because my DARE kids now are like 33 and 34 years old.
Yes.
So it will be interesting to see what it is. And sometimes research is, how should we say, the methodology can be flawed based on how they set up their questions and their methodology for what they're researching.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And, you mentioned the media. And so force multiplier, negative, positive. We need a more positive. When I say we, and I still feel part of law enforcement. I still feel part of that. I always say this. You can take the kid out of New York, but you can't take New York out of the kid. And in the same way, you can take the kid out of the police department, but you can't take the police department out of the kid. So here I align with with my brothers and sisters in law enforcement. How do we create the media as a positive force multiplier for us? How do we do that? What responsibility does law enforcement take on being our own best PR? How do we do that?
One, like I say, we can't be the best kept secret. And as I've often said, oftentimes many people, because of the relationship and the history with the media and law enforcement, we tend to alienate each other, us versus media, media versus us. When if we look at it and say, if we're all in this thing together, it's kind of like I tell people, when you get on an airplane, whether you're in first class or last class, we're all on the same plane. So when you get in there and you realize media's job is to sell stories. So when you're at your agency, are you building a relationship with the media outlet so that they know you, you know them, and you can be mutually beneficial to each other? Because therefore, if you're providing them things that they can write about, and when things go bad, be honest. Yes, this didn't go the way that I expected it to. Let's just make sure we spell my name right and let's get the facts right, and we can be procedurally just in how we deal with this particular incident. But
Yes.
if you don't do that and you are antagonistic, everything you do, the media is going to be coming after you. And the thing I tell people sometimes is everybody has that proverbial bucket of water and bucket of gasoline in their hands as they leave home. And each of us goes out there, and based on how we treat people, that means if we make a little mistake, are they going to use the bucket of water and nobody knows about it? Or are they going to use the bucket of gasoline and everybody knows about it?
See, but
So we should be living our lives and working our relationships so that when we have these encounters, people at least speak with us and not use the bucket of gasoline all of the time.
yes, and here's the other thing. If we already have a relationship, so you and I have a relationship. It's new, relatively new, and we're building upon it. And the more time passes and the more positive interactions we have, the stronger our relationship develops, right?
Correct.
So then if something goes wrong, there's a misunderstanding, there's a miscommunication, there's a hurt feeling, there's an injury, whatever it might be, we come together and we can really connect. I think you used that term,
Correct.
connect. We can connect, we can communicate, and we can resolve. So in many cases now, that's not what's happening by and large. And there is injury with a lack of maybe validation that this has happened, maybe a lack of acknowledging um, and taking responsibility. So how do you get that? You mentioned before, bridging the gap between theory and practice. It's one thing to have a theory about police community relationships, and it's another to actually practice it. So how do you feel, or how do you see this relationship becoming healed, if you will? Because in some cases there's a great injury and a great gap. So how do you see that resolving, as from an executive perspective? How do you do it?
Okay. It is complex. It didn't get this way overnight, so it's not going to be better in the morning. We also have to understand that when we're talking about the history of law enforcement in America, it's different than the history of law enforcement in Europe. When we look at it here in the US, we do have it where it was dealing with the property rights, dealing with the slaves, where they were being returned to their property owners. And so we have to understand the subconscious things that are there on both sides of individuals when we're having the encounters, and where their histories may come from. Where you have some segments of the community where their history was those that were law enforcement and those that were not law enforcement. So you have to be able to understand their histories when you're dealing with them, and take into consideration what their histories might be, because one's perception is one's reality. So if their perception is law enforcement is great and that's what they've lived, that's what they believe. If theirs is that law enforcement is not to be trusted, that's it. Now it's up to us to sit down and have that discussion. We also have to look at it from a standpoint of staffing. Who is it that is working in law enforcement? And many times when you're having stress in the community and stress within the agency, how are those segments of the community that work for the police department being treated within the police department? Because a lot of times you might have various segments of the community that come home and talk about how they're mistreated inside the police department. They say, yes, this is me, this is it. And in my research, it came up, one of the themes that came up in my thematic analysis of my dissertation was too blue to be black and too black to be blue, which basically means when you're in law enforcement and black, sometimes they're looked at, are you really blue or are you really part of the neighborhood? And then when you're in the neighborhood, they're like, yeah, he's black, but he worked for them. That's 5-0. So you end up straddling a line. And so therefore, how do you build those bridges to where one, the community is saying, hey, let's go out and have the police department is like saying, I want to go to this community meeting. But then the officer's like, yeah, man, they're not promoting me. They skipped over me for this. They skipped over me for that. And the community knows you. And they're like, well, why did they skip over Dr. Telesco? What about her didn't they promote? Well, if they didn't promote Dr. Telesco, why should I go if I'm in Dr. Telesco's group? So while the police department is doing stuff and inviting, many times we have to reach out and find out why is it that the community is not buying in. And many times I think we in law enforcement look at the community as if they're naive or less than intelligent. So if you're reaching out and trying to build a bridge with the community, but while members of the community are inside the organization and struggling, that's a cognitive dissonance, if you will. So therefore, the community is trying to see, are you really serious about moving forward? And if you are, what are you doing about the recruitment, retention, promotion of individuals from our community before you start doing this grandstanding, acting as though you're really trying to build a bridge with us? Start inside the organization and then you can move outside.
Yes, yes. And speaking of intra-organizational issues, as an executive, your perspective on this, how are we treating our cops? And our cops are being asked to do things day in and day out. And we talk about not just critical incidents, traumatic events like a 9/11, let's say, or a hurricane in our case here in South Florida, or riot situation, or Stoneman Douglas situation. And, those are critical incidents. Those are traumatic events, right? But then there's cumulative stress, the regular old stressors of policing, police work itself, the danger of policing, intra-organizational practices, the bureaucracy, the paperwork, the criminal justice system itself, all of those things that pile up on an officer. And we see officers hurting themselves at a higher rate than civilians are hurting them. We see, alcohol abuse. We see relationship conflict and domestic violence at times, and hurt people. We know that, right? So how are we taking care of our own police? And from an executive perspective, how much of an impact do you think this has on the police community relationship?
Very good point. When you're dealing with individuals, when you say hurt people, and then also on top of the mental health issues that we're going forward, you're just looking at your job issues. So what we've done, different agencies have done different things. I know we have opened up more with the EAP. We've also dealt with, some have crisis intervention stress debriefing teams within the organization, those individuals that have been trained to meet with and counsel their peers, because as you know, many times you can go to peers and discuss what it is that you have that's going on. And one thing that I will say that our Chief Maglione did at Fort Lauderdale during his tenure, we hired an in-house psychologist just for the purposes of taking care of our employees. So many times this is not EAP. This is not something that's external. This is one that we hired internally. And this is not one that does the fitness for duty and all of those type things. This is a psychologist that is there for the mental health of our employees. So he makes himself available for counseling sessions for the employees and their families, because while we go through things on the job, our families are also going through some of those similar stresses. So that is one way that we can be dealing with the mental health issues of our family. And you are correct that law enforcement officers are committing suicide at a higher rate. And it's very interesting because those statistics are really of those that are doing it while they're still employed as law enforcement officers, because it would be the number would, I believe, increase if you measured the statistics of individuals that committed suicide after retiring or separating from a job in law enforcement.
Yeah. So now, what I wanted to ask you, specifically as it relates to early intervention, alcohol abuse, even prescription drug abuse. Police officer gets in an accident, a car accident, is placed on some kind of pain medication, and then there's addiction, which we know that opioids are highly addictive. How does your department, or did your department, seek to help these officers? I know that in many cases there is some type of rehabilitation and treatment and assistance that's offered in terms of an intervention.
It's really kind of interesting because I've talked with some individuals about this. And when you look at it socioeconomically, if you have a lot of money, you go off to somewhere out in Vegas and it's called rehab. And if you don't have a lot of money, you go someplace else and they call it that you're having a drug problem. So, we have to acknowledge that and move forward. And as I stated before, one of the things that we brought in is by having an on-staff psychologist that is a buffer, because quite honestly, some individuals don't even trust EAP with the confidentiality that it is supposed to have for various reasons. So when you have it to where you have an on-staff psychologist that is not going to be in the job train, dealing with your job and dealing with fitness for duty, that is one way that you can do it. Another way to do it is how we kind of eased into it. I forget the chief that came down and he was touring the US, if you will. He's spoken at the FBI, ENA, and some other law enforcement conferences discussing the issue of suicide and mental health within law enforcement officers and what it is that was going on. And that, as I stated before, is a form of education. So as he came out and was doing that education of law enforcement, and individuals began to realize the importance of having that, it spread and more people began taking steps to put things in place to help the team in case they need that.
So, Dr. Salters, final question, and we're almost out of time, and I want to give some of our other panelists who have been invited to come on and ask questions, as well as our attendees, if they want to ask some questions of you about this subject matter. But we're talking about police stress. We kind of went, we hit a lot of different topics tonight within the context of police community relations. But how do you think police stress really, how is that relevant, if at all, to effective police community relationships? Is it related?
It is tremendously related, because I think sometimes people do not realize that law enforcement officers are people too. And we come from the same communities that we oftentimes police. And it's kind of interesting right now with some of the issues that we're dealing with. When you're dealing with homelessness and you're out there and everyone's calling the police department to deal with the individuals that are homeless, it's very frustrating to us, because as a law enforcement officer, we want to be able to solve the problem. Whatever the problem is, how can we solve it? And it's very frustrating when you're called repeatedly to deal with issues which you cannot solve. So therefore, when you're calling me about homeless individuals, and this is someone I've known for years, and I know that we've provided them all the assistance that we can provide, and there's nothing else that we can do because it's not against the law to be homeless, and you call me, that begins to get stressful, and different people handle stress differently. Same thing when you're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. When you talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, are you talking about the philosophy where it is Black Lives Matter too? Because what's really being shown in the different things that are out there is that there is a different treatment from law enforcement to the minority community as to the majority community. So in philosophy, can we agree that, as the one person wrote, when they say Black Lives Matter too, it's TOO, and all they want to do is be given the same value as the other lives that are out there, because it doesn't seem like they are. And we have to make sure that when we have that discussion, we're not confusing that with the Black Lives Matter organization. So when you're out there and you are in a minority group and there may be a protest or something going on, you're here doing your job, but you're understanding the reason for the protest. And so therefore that creates a lot of stress, a lot of high blood pressure, a lot of health issues. Well, right here in the state of Florida, it's recognized from a health standpoint to where when we joined the agency, or we joined the organization, our blood pressure and everything was fine. But over time, it's shown that due to the stress, we have heart issues. So therefore, we have the heart bill in the state of Florida. So basically, if you join the agency and you didn't have any heart issues, if you develop them over time, don't worry, it's work related. And so therefore, the heart bill takes care of things. That's one way that it was being recognized of the stressors of this job. So that's just a few that we have to kind of look at and see how we respond to it, how we deal with it, both medically, psychologically, and when we're out there dealing with individuals and understanding what they may or may not be going through.
Yes, yes. Dr. Salters, there's so much here, right? I mean, there's just, because this is a complex issue, because human beings are complex, and the community is consists of human beings, and the police consist of human beings. And so therefore, of course, these issues are complex, and there is no simple answer. But I want to leave with this. I used to say this to my recruits in the police academy. You are the face of the police department. Not only are you the face of the NYPD, I said that to my recruits in the NYPD. Not only are you the face of the NYPD, but you are the face of all police officers across not only the country, but the world. You represent law enforcement. So you are the best practice of police community relations that we possibly could have. So that's not to say that the strategies and the interventions and the initiatives that we've kind of touched upon a little bit here tonight aren't important and relevant and critical. But the police officer, individual officer, him or herself, can make the world of difference in the lives of so many people by their very own interaction. Would you agree on that?
Most definitely. And that's in the procedural justice, it says the actions of one law enforcement officer can impact the life of a generation just based on what our actions are.
Yes.
So we definitely impact generations by our actions, either positively or negatively.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I know that you are a very, very busy man. So again, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. And I want to give our attendees and our panelists an opportunity. Dr. Durham has her hand up. Go ahead, Dean.
Dr. Salters, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very, very much. That was just wonderful. I'm so excited that you're going to be teaching for us. And I forgot to thank and recognize David and Josh before. I just wanted to thank them because I'm excited for you all being nominated again for your sociodrama club under Dr. Telesco. But Dr. Salters, I'm so impressed with your background and your broad wealth of experience. And I have two questions. They're very different. One is, if you had, based on the executive position that you held and what you've held in the past, if you in your particular area had an influx of a sustainable amount of money, what would you use that money for to create the most positive impact between the community and police relations?
I would go back to the beginnings and I would deal with the children and make sure you have an impact on the children. We're going to deal and when I say children, I mean your K through 6, because every parent loves to see somebody that cares about their kids. And if you've cared about those kids and the parents know that, you have the whole community. And the interesting thing about our educational system now is, long years ago, you lived around the school, that your kids attended. But now due to busing, due to charter schools, due to private schools, you've kind of lost some of that. So we have to take that into consideration. I would do that. And then also what I would do is make sure that when I have the officers that are working within my organization, that they spend time in the schools. I don't care what your assignment is. When you spend time in the schools with the kids, then you begin to build the bonds. And then also when I'm looking at individuals that I'm looking to promote or those that are first line supervisors, I must make sure that they understand it is not about us. The true sense of success is making those around us successful, and make sure that they are going back and understanding the importance of training others and making sure they understand we work for the community. You know, if we could have, for lack of a better word, have a Chick-fil-A philosophy of dealing with policing, we'd all be better. And, you know, it'd be my pleasure.
That's great. Thank you. And I have one more question, Dr. Telesco. Dr. Salters, there are a lot of community police oversight boards or citizens review boards. And I know we have one in Fort Lauderdale. What's your feeling about those? And is there any concern with respect to officers? And, you know, that's sort of, I don't know, second guessing maybe because somebody that maybe doesn't have experience is making decisions on use of force or past practices or, you know, something like that. I was just interested in your view about that.
It's really interesting because every review board has been started, some of them for similar reasons and some for not so similar reasons. Some were started because they sincerely believe that their police department is not doing what it should be, and they want increased accountability. So therefore they're demanding their citizens review board, and some of them want subpoena power and everything else. Where others are bodies that are generally concerned about what's going on and are looking to help. So you have to kind of see what the vibe is or what the culture is within your respective community policing oversight board. And one of the things also you have to look at that many of them, you have to make sure they've gone through the training. You have to make sure they understand the police officers. And again, that goes back to connecting. If I'm a law enforcement agency and I am truly connected to my community and we are connected and communicating, and the Citizens Review Board panelists are coming from the community, as Dr. Telesco stated earlier, we would be able to have a discussion. We'd be able to have a meeting of the minds. And if we did something that was not appropriate as the police department, we could acknowledge that and we learn from it and move forward and deal with it in a professional manner as opposed to an antagonistic manner. And if we did do something that you thought was wrong, you at least trust the process enough to know that we were thorough, we were transparent, and our procedure was just. And many times with procedural justice, it doesn't mean that what you're wanting to happen will happen. All we're meaning is that the procedure was just and we followed a set principle regardless who was being the accused or regardless of the situation.
Right. Thank you for your question, Dean. Any other questions?
I do have a question. Good evening, Dr. Salters. We met on the phone some time ago.
Yes.
I'm Dr. Castro. I'm the Associate Dean of the School of Criminal Justice, and I had the pleasure of meeting you first on the phone and of listening to your presentation tonight, which was, I'm just hoping the audience is enjoying these as much as I did. But I do have a question. You said a couple of things that resonated with me, and one having to do with a couple of studies that I read recently about community policing and about at least two communities that were having their officers live in the very same neighborhoods they patrol. And I would like to get your take on it because at some point in your presentation, you mentioned something about the officers know those communities and they live in those communities. But that's not always the case. And there seemed to be, when it comes to the perception of the police from the community side, these studies were quite promising in terms of how having the officers reside there was having an impact on their views of police and law enforcement in general. So I want to know if you have any stats as part of your job or personal views as to whether that would be a viable, interesting thing to test.
Okay, I have personal views that I will share with you. One of the things I look at is I served the city of Fort Lauderdale for 28 years. I never lived in the city of Fort Lauderdale, but I will challenge you to find individuals that made it to my level that have the amount of community involvement that I did. So would it have been greater or less if I lived in the city? I don't know. I really don't. And then sometimes when you look at it with some cities and police departments, some cities, the salary that they pay police officers, they can't afford to live within the cities. And so therefore that comes into play. And a lot of times when you look at the studies, most studies are looking at it based on the relationships that the police officers have made. And they stated that when the police officers know the people in the communities, then they tend to react differently, is the overarching theme in most of the studies. And the studies are saying that if they lived there, then these are some things that would happen. Well, I would submit to you that it really depends on the officer, because I've dealt with some individuals that they live in a house that happens to be in the community, but they don't even shop at the neighborhood stores. So is this an officer that lives in the community, meaning they live in a house, they go to the park, they frequent the stores, and they do all of that? Or do they basically drive into their garage, shut the garage, go into the house, have somebody else cut the grass, they get out, drive to work, and this type of deal? So I do believe there's some other things that have to happen, but I don't think that it would hurt. But then again, as I stated, are we paying the officers enough to live in the city? Why is it that officers don't live in the city that they work? And on the other side with officers, some of them that live in the city that they live, that in the city that they work in, I've seen that. I've also seen some living in apartment complexes or in their jurisdiction. And sometimes they say that they never get off work because the neighbors are always calling them whenever they have issues. So it can go either way. I don't think if it were a silver bullet, it would be let's do it. But the other issue that I think that you would run into is, right now, many police departments are tremendously short staffed. And that's with you being able to often hire. Some of those agencies that have it where you have to live within the cities are also facing multiple issues with dealing with staffing. So right now, I know many jurisdictions are having staffing shortages and they don't have the residential requirements. So if you impose a residential requirement, imagine the impact that would have already on your police departments that are understaffed.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. Did that answer your question? And do you have any other further questions?
I'm good. Thank you.
So, Dr. Castro, I want to also say thank you to you for your support. Dr. Salters, Dr. Castro is, as he mentioned, the Associate Dean of the School of Criminal Justice. We also have on the YouTube channel right now, Dr. Tammy Kushner. And so one of the things that is so wonderful is when you have your bosses who are so supportive. And so I'm sure that your police officers, your sergeants, your captains also, and your lieutenants also must have felt supported. And when I think that when the rank and file feel supported by their superiors, by the executives, by those who are in the leadership roles, that's what makes the cohesion, the cooperation, the communication effective, and therefore transfers into the community.
Correct.
Right. So thank you, Dr. Castro, for being that support and that effective leader. I want to just pull on now David and Josh. So David and Josh, if you guys don't mind coming in for a minute, these are our criminal justice seniors. They're about to graduate. They're undergrads, and they're my left and my right hand. These two, and they have been instrumental in helping us with all of these initiatives that we've been doing, these programs, but I wanted to just give Josh and David a chance to maybe ask one question each. So Josh, why don't you start?
Honestly, that has to probably be one of the hardest things that I've had to do this year, Dr. T. I mean, I feel like Dr. Salters just covered so much information in such a short amount of time, as well as Dr. Castro's question also, Sociodrama Club, since y'all were talking about it, I'm wearing the shirt. Um, but I guess Mr. Salter, if Dr. Salter, sorry, if I have to ask something, I guess I would just say, as we've talked about like the police and like what we've seen from a community side, what can we do best to help encourage this growth in the community and to continue to possibly get to where we make it easier on law enforcement and ourselves to continue to grow and maybe even make this easier on everybody as one?
Great question. One of the things I often say is, from a community standpoint, this is one thing that I've looked at. The community is waiting on the police department to do something, and the police department is waiting on the community to do something. It's kind of like that awkward feeling as a teenager at the dance. One's waiting on the other one to dance, and who's going to ask who to dance? And I'm saying, from a police department standpoint, we need to open ourselves up and say, community, we're here, come and see what we're out about. And then same thing in the community standpoint. How many times have you really invited the police out to a homeowners meeting? How many times have you invited the police officers open to a school night or something that is non-adversarial? From a law enforcement standpoint, I have been invited to some meetings that were more like an ambush. And so when you get there and you're ambushed and that word goes out, you tend to be a little less anxious to go to other meetings. But when we begin to meet each other on a common ground, meet each other on the level and having some conversations, because law enforcement, we want to get crime down and have a safe community. And I do believe that's what our community wants. So if we can come together with that and start having some meaningful meetings and come up with some partnerships where we can do that, I think that's where you see a lot of things go a lot better. And I think that's some of the things that you see from the minority communities that you might not see in some of the wealthier communities, because you'll see them all at the chamber meetings where you tend to have a different socioeconomic level, and the police are there. We're providing the services at the marinas and this type of stuff, and everybody knows the owners of this club and that club. The other communities are looking for those same kind of connections.
And and also, I just wanted to just shout out again to Josh that I know that Josh is interested in pursuing a career in law enforcement. And so, Dr. Salters, what would you give him? Because I can give him all of the advice and suggestions, but he'll probably take it better from you now. But what advice would you have for someone like Josh, who's graduating with his undergraduate degree in criminal justice from a very reputable school, and wanting to seek employment now in law enforcement? What would be your advice to him?
One, I often share the video, Know Your What from Your Why, from Michael Jr. So if you haven't watched that one, watch it. And it focuses on know your why. And what is your big why? What is it that Joshua is living for? What makes a difference for him? And for me, my thing is, if I can help somebody as I pass along the way, my living will not be in vain. And I'm always trying to help the community. And so one of my friends that knew that, he said, you always talking about helping the community. Have you ever thought about being in law enforcement? I said, no, it's dangerous. I don't want to do it. It took him 5 years to talk to me about it, but he understood what it was I wanted to do. So I found a what that fit into my why. And so therefore I went there. And if law enforcement is your what that you want to do, then you have to decide, am I talking city, county, state, or federal law enforcement? Each of them have different pros and cons. Then the other thing I would encourage you to do is look at the requirements for each one of them and make sure that you are exceeding the requirements. And if you know someone in that area, I would suggest you reach out to them. LinkedIn is a tremendous tool. So if you wanted to go to a certain agency, go over there to LinkedIn, put in the thing, see which ones has the most contact. You might even meet some others that graduated from an outstanding university down here in South Florida called Nova University. And so therefore that gives you another way to connect instead of just communicating with them on LinkedIn. And so therefore they can give you some insight. And with that insight, you can make some decisions.
So here's the trick, Josh. It sounds like you need to exceed the requirements. The way to exceed the requirements is for you to become a candidate in the master's program. Right? Okay. Speaking of which, David Troxel who is my left hand. I'm going to spotlight him right now. I'm going to actually remove your spotlight for a minute. You're always spotlighted in my heart, Josh, but I'm going to just remove it just for the technical purposes right now. And David is graduating. David is a vet. He served in the military as a combat medic in the Army, and he's been my left hand throughout the last few years. And he is actually applying to our master's program in criminal justice. So David, any questions for Dr. Salters?
Honestly, there's been so many good questions that's gone around the room. Dr. Salters, you're an amazing speaker, and I always enjoy watching you work. My question is this: you talk a lot about healing the relationship between the police department and the community. So I'm always concerned to see what's on the top of your list when it comes to that. And also, as a community member, what can we do as civilians to help aid in that restoring, I guess, the relationship between the police and the community?
Okay, one of the things you said, that word restoring, yeah, I don't know whether you studied the restorative justice circles and those things, the whole technique that's out there where it gets the victim in front of the actual person that committed the crime, and they actually go through and work through, and it's a process. And I know the Urban League has been doing a lot of restorative justice stuff, and Officer Fahey with our police department, McCrae, and some others have been working with that. So that's one thing that we have, that restorative justice circle, which is a process that helps dealing with the victim and the suspects. But then also, when you're talking about it as an individual from the community, it begins with action. And I've seen so many people, the only action that they're taking is talking and not really stepping forward. I would be encouraging individuals to find out what opportunities do they have to get to know more about the police department. Treat it like you would a restaurant. If you found an outstanding restaurant, would you share the information with others? If the answer is yes, then you need to begin sharing information about the community policing academies that your various agencies may have. And if your agency does not have it, you might want to send an email to the chief and say, hey, I heard about this, about community policing academies at some other agencies. Do you all have one, or why don't you have one? And it might be that they had one, and due to low enrollment, it wasn't there. And you might say, well, here I am, let's do this. If we can get, how many people do we need to have in the community policing academy? Then you go for it and say, okay, I believe I can work together with the community so we can get our minimum number. If we do that, can you all put on a community policing academy for us? And we do that, because that was one thing that I ran up against, where we just were not having the enrollment. We put it out there, we talked to people, and we just did not have the interest that we needed to sustain the class. Just like a university, you got minimum numbers before you can put on a class. So I think that will go a long way.
Thank you. And thank you again, David, for being here. And again, thank you, Dr. Castro, for being here. At this time, I'm going to ask for two people to come on and share their video. One is, I'm going to put him on a spot, hope he's into it, Mike Dutko, who is one of our PhD candidates. And the other is Caleb Brock, who's in my community relations class, my police community relations, the new elective for the master's program. So I'm going to ask Caleb to come on. Thank you, Dr. Castro, for you. You're welcome to keep your video on if you want or not. So Mike, Brock, I need to give you hosting rights. So let me do that. Promote you to panelist, and then give you the rights to share your video. Let's see, where did you go? Okay, so make you co-host, and now you can share your video with us. So if you don't mind, if the both of you, Mike, I'm going to ask you to go first if you don't mind. I always brag on Mike. Mike is one of our PhD candidates, as I mentioned, former law enforcement. He's currently a criminal defense attorney, and he's a mover and a shaker. And certainly going places. He's already there. But Mike, if you don't mind, to put you on the spot, maybe you can either provide a comment, a statement, assessment, question, whatever you like. You have the floor, Mike.
Thank you. My comment would be quite simple. First of all, good evening, Dr. Salter, my friend Greg.
Good evening. Greg.
My comment would be to Dr. Telesco, Dr. Castro, and Dr. Durham. Good job. you've brought a good man into your fold, and he's only going to make the program better. So the entirety of Nova Southeastern University will benefit from his involvement there. To Dr. Salter, my question would be, this was an issue that I've thought about, I've contemplated for years. As you know, in addition to being a criminal defense lawyer, I represent a whole lot of police officers, but I've represented white officers, black officers, male officers, female, all kinds of officers. I tend to subscribe to the theory that many fewer officers are really racists than what much of the public would say. And after the year we've had, after the death of George Floyd and all of the protests and whatnot, there are many who are calling for defunding the police and are quick to say all cops are racist. I tend to reject that theory. I firmly reject that theory. But in preparing some recent research, one of the things that I've thought about is the way that police agencies measure police productivity tends to cause this racially disparate policing or differential policing. Bottom line is, as you know, between Rio Vista and Bayview, Coral Ridge and Bayview, the law is not enforced there the way it is in the Northwest section. And in the Northwest section, predominantly Black citizens, there's an undercurrent of aggression and hostility. Those areas, those neighborhoods are policed like a prison ground. Pick up that cigarette button. I didn't tell you. And that, I think, causes a hostility that is palpable in the communities. But my point here is, I think that good, well-intended officers who don't necessarily have a racial component to their existence are trying to do things to measure up for the police performance evaluations. And I think a lot of elected officials and politicians use those police performance evaluations to tout the success of their department. So I think what I'm saying is management, politicians need to rethink the marching orders they give the officers to go on the street. And the bottom line is, I would like to see more of an emphasis on quality of policing and not just quantity, and measuring police success by numbers of arrests. Your thoughts?
Yes, and if you go back to when I mentioned 21st century policing, one of the bullets there is policy and oversight. So therefore, the policy is what the officers are following. And that's why I said sometimes we have well-intentioned policies that tends to have a disparate impact on certain sections of our community, just as we do with hiring practices. So when you talk about the evaluations and what is done differently in your Rio Vistas, your Bayviews, and your upscale neighborhoods, as opposed to your lesser neighborhoods in the 33311, which are predominantly Black and brown, is we can have over policing. But what we also have here is a case of, as I've talked about, connecting. So you think about the individuals that are living over in your areas that are policed, let's say, less severely, and there's more discretion given. Many times there's more discretion given because if you write an individual a ticket and they will hypothetically be a friend of Mike Dutko, and Mike Dutko represents a lot of police, and Mike gives a phone call, then it's like, well, why did I even bother giving Greg Salters a ticket if he knows Mike Dutko? You know, and so then
that number is 95. No, I'm just kidding.
You know, and then in the other neighborhood is like, well, I don't know anybody. If I'm going to do anything, what's going to happen to me? And as you know, from a criminal standpoint, it gets down to what's going on in your jury. So when you look in your jury pools, the individuals go over there, and a lot of people that are on your jury, I say I get to be judged by a jury of my peers. So I would be looking for a Black male that grew up in middle-class white communities, that went to an all-Black college, who worked in law enforcement, got his PhD. So that would be a jury of my peers. And so therefore, when I go, I am not going to be judged by a jury of my peers. So therefore, I'm going to be sentenced accordingly based on whatever their views are. So to your point, it is a large systemic issue, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the officers that are doing their job, like, see, I knew Greg did that. That's why he was found guilty. And the other guy got off, and they're like, see, I knew he didn't do it. That's why he got off. When it's a lot deeper than that, and people really do not look into it. So to your point, I think that we do need to look at it, but then it gets into how much does it cost? Because community-oriented policing is more expensive than traditional policing, because traditional policing is basically how many tickets did you get and how many arrests did you get? It's easy to do. But if I'm going over there and I'm meeting with Mike Dutko to find out what's really going on in his neighborhood and all of this type of stuff, it's going to take more money. And as you know, most communities don't want to raise a penny tax to increase the amount of money that we pay the cops to be on those longer. It's dealing with what's your response time? How long did it take you to get there? So I think that as a community, we need to understand that to really do what we need to do, it's not cheap, but we have to look at what's the best thing for our community.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mike. Thank you for your question. Good question. Thank you for your invaluable input into our program. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Caleb, you get the last word here before Dr. Salters actually gets the real last word, and then I really get the most last word. But Caleb Barak is one of our master's students. He's an amazing also asset to our program, and he's currently enrolled in the police community relations class, the elective. So Caleb, what question or comment do you have for Dr. Salters?
My question would be more in the realm of the class that I'm taking right now with you. It would be in relation to the BLM anti-cop rhetoric that has been going on for the last year. Do we need to have more of a push for humanizing the police force again? As they've just said that it is a faceless mass, it is going to affect us as a community. They don't care about us. It's us against them. Should we try for a more humanizing and empathy-based system like they would with countering hate speech?
Great question. So when you say the BLM movement and the anti-cop, is that the BLM dealing with the organization, or is that what some have used as anecdotal type things that are coming at? Which view are you addressing?
I mean, as in where they say all cops are bastards. They generalize and they dehumanize and they say it's them, they're doing this, it's not us. They are different than us. They are not in our favor. They are just a faceless mass of hate that the government is using to oppress us. And
Okay.
they take away the individuality and the identity of the actual officers doing this.
Okay, and now when you look at that, you have to understand the culture in which you're dealing with. It's just like when we've had the questions here and the students that are here and the people that are represented on this forum. Let's look at it from an Afrocentric view. It is looked at from a collective. We are a we type of community. If you look at the Black and brown community, it is very collective. You'll find out the extended families and that type of stuff are there. Whereas if you look at it from a European standpoint, it's an I type of standpoint. So it's I. So therefore, when you hear individuals from the community that are Black, brown, or otherwise marginalized discuss, it's kind of like people may ask me, Greg, what do the Black cops think? It's very rare that someone will go up to a white male at the thing and say, hey, what do the white guys think of the police department? That doesn't happen. That's just a cultural kind of thing that we have to understand. So when we are speaking, and we meaning marginalized individuals, and when you're talking about law enforcement, we often say that many times they're painted with that broad brush. So therefore, you're painted with a broad brush, just as many individuals in the minority community are painted with a broad brush. And until somebody goes in there, I've had it where I've talked to individuals and say, oh, you aren't like the rest of them. I say, well, which them are you referring to?
Right.
And sometimes that's why I say we have to connect more with the community, because many times there's some communities that the only time that they saw law enforcement was when we were going in to enforce the law. They didn't see us in the DARE program. They didn't see us in the officer-friendly programs. They didn't see us at their homeowners meeting. They didn't see us out there at the kids' basketball games or anything. That's why I'm big on connecting, extending the olive branch, and inviting the community in to see that law enforcement is more than what they may have been exposed to. And that's why I want the community to also invite the police department in, because quite honestly, some people believe that just because there's a lot of crime going on in a neighborhood, that everybody in the neighborhood is bad. And that's what happens with over policing. If your grandmother's house was always getting broken into, you're going to call the police department. I need you guys to stop people from breaking into my grandmother's house. So when law enforcement goes in there, and from an executive level, as Dr. Telesco states, as an executive, when I send my team into an area to address a crime, if I'm having burglaries in an area and they come back with no tickets, no arrest, and burglaries still going up, they need to show me something that they're doing for their time. So what are cops going to do? They're going to go in there, they're going to write tickets, they're going to arrest people, and the people that live in there are going to be the victims of that over policing. And then when they get ready to go to school or go to get their master's, and perhaps they got a felony drug charge because somebody dropped drugs by their feet, now they're no longer eligible for financial aid. So therefore, they can't get into the master's program at this outstanding institution. So I think there's a lot of different layers that we have to deal with. And what I like about education, Brock, is that it has you in a class that allows you to feel comfortable to ask those types of questions, so we can have allies like you that are looking into it. So when you're writing your dissertation, it's really going to come out in that research.
Yes, yes. So, once again, these issues are so complex. We've just scratched the surface. And I know that we're going to continue to have the dialogue. We're going to continue to have this kind of discussion, which is, not only rooted in what the evidence says and what best practices are, but what the practitioners are saying. And so, again, your input, Dr. Salters, is invaluable to us. You're such an asset here to the discussion, because not only do you bring the academic piece and your education to the table, but you bring your experience as an executive. So thank you again. It's people like you and all of the students that we have here assembled tonight that give me hope for the future, that there is hope, and that we can bridge the gap between theory and practice. I do believe that strongly. And so we look forward to hearing more from you, Dr. Salters, in the classroom as you dive deep into all of our various programs. And we will be talking to you soon. And we thank you so much. Any last word from your perspective? Any last closing thoughts?
I just like for everyone to think about, anytime that we're doing things out here and we're talking about the community, remember that means it is not about us, it is about the community. So we need to reach out, engage the community, find out what is it that they need. And sometimes when we show ourselves friendly, then they will return that. So let's get out there, talk to them, invite them to panels, find out what it is that they're going for, what is it that their concerns are, what are their issues, and see how we can help bridge this gap. Because once we connect, that's when we can begin really changing our society. And as I often say, I'm Dr. Gregory A. Salters, and you all have been seasoned for success.
Thank you so much for joining us again and taking the time out of your busy schedule. Dr. Castro, I see that you put your video on. Closing thoughts, closing statement, anything?
Just a big thank you, and I could not applaud any louder your words.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the dean. Thank you, Dr. Dern. Thank you, Dr. Kushner. Thank you to all of the students who were here for the webinar. On the webinar side, thank you for everyone who's watching us on YouTube. And we'll see you maybe next Monday night, same bat channel, same bat time, same Zoom link, same YouTube channel for another executive perspective on best practices in police community relations.